All right. Welcome to probably the most important panel on this stage this week, in my opinion, not just because of the guests, but because of the topic. We're talking about energy grids and Bitcoin mining, and these lights are very bright. How Bitcoin mining sort of is a force to improve and expand the energy infrastructure that we all rely on, but don't necessarily understand all the intricacies of how it works and how it can improve with mining. So I'm honored to be up here just to ask questions of these preeminent minds in mining and explore a little bit about the things that they're building and dig a little bit into how grids work and how Bitcoin mining can improve that infrastructure for us. I want to start off just with Harry and then go down the panel. Give each of these guys a chance to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about what they're working on, who they're with, and then we'll dig into some questions. Harry.
Awesome, thank you. Harry Sudak, VP of Strategy with Grid. We mine Bitcoin.
Love it. Zach Bradford, CEO of CleanSpark. We also mine Bitcoin. So
there's a theme here.
Yeah, excited to talk about the topics today.
Yeah, I'm Sergey Gerasimovich, CEO of Easy Blockchain. We're not only mining Bitcoin, we're co-locating customers as well.
Paul Prager, TerraWolf CEO, controlling stakeholder. We mine Bitcoin. We're zero carbon.
So, thank you, by the way. The grid, in my mind, is a little bit like the internet. We use it every day for 100 different things, and most people don't really understand how it works. So I want to start just with each of these guys pitching in a little bit to explain what the grid is, and I guess how it operates on a day-to-day basis, or maybe hour-to-hour basis. Not really sure who wants to take a stab at it first. Maybe Harry, you want to just lead off, and then we can sort of go around and put the puzzle together?
Sure. So the first thing to keep in mind is that the grid is not one thing. The grid is really just a big patchwork of clusters of three kind of pieces of the puzzle, which is generation, transmission, and delivery. And so at a very basic level, what that means is that on one side, there's a turbine spinning. There's lots of different ways to make the turbine spin, but that's what produces the power in the first place. And then the power gets transmitted over lines, high voltage lines typically, all the way around to the different kind of pockets of substations that are sitting out there. And then the power gets brought to a lower voltage and can get consumed and then dispersed out on a delivery basis. So like when you see the power lines like by your house, that's the third form of that energy that started by spinning, then it got moved, then it got delivered.
Paul, I don't know if you have anything to add there. I just want to preface any comments you might make with the fact that you guys are a little bit unique in that you don't only own your mining operations, you also own the power you generate. So you work with this stuff all the time in a way most miners probably don't. Anything to add there to explain, what the grid is?
Yeah, the grid is basically what connects the demand to the load. And where there are imbalances or where there are great opportunities for miners to not only mine Bitcoin, but to serve the grid. So we've owned power plants for the last 30 years, energy infrastructure, all kinds. And, we were early adopters of Bitcoin mining. We built out Marathon's facility in Montana. And we decided the right way to go about mining Bitcoin was to focus on zero carbon assets. So that for us is right now hydro and nuke.
Zach, Sergey, anything else in explaining the grid?
I think what is important we need to understand in the grids that it's not only power generation, but it's users. So there are multiple users on the grid, like regular people like us who turn on the switch and just make coffee in the morning. Also, there are crypto miners like us as well who actually mine Bitcoin on a large scale. And both of those users participate in the grid. And that's important to understand that when cryptocurrency miners are using power, they just participate in the same grid as everyone else does. Of course, there are some specific cases where we build microgrids, but I think we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, and that's really maybe somewhere that I'd hit on. That's how we got into the space, actually. CleanSpark was a microgrid company. That's what we were focusing on. And something interesting about the grid is, there's all this power being produced and consumed all the time, but it's very intermittent, the usage. People go to work, you go into the office, you turn the lights on, you turn them off. And so we were very involved in energy storage. So in a microgrid setting where you maybe produce power, you consume power, and you store power all on the same site. And as we got exposed to the Bitcoin side, we always talk about this store of value in Bitcoin, but that's really what we're doing is we're storing the value of that energy in Bitcoin. And so that was kind of our aha moment. And I think if you ignore the storage component and what's happening on the grid, you can really miss out. And instead of storing it directly in a battery, we're putting that value in Bitcoin, and by default, we're therefore consuming instead of storing. So there's some really interesting things in how Bitcoin is interacting with the grid to really add value, like everybody's mentioning. So.
Yeah, on that idea, there's the term thrown around that sort of, Bitcoin is energy money, and I think it fits exactly with what you described. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that, though, and have you guys explain, so we know basically what a grid is. There's generation and there's consumption of the power. On the consumer side, like what makes Bitcoin miners unique, I guess, compared to like just merchant power consumers or other types of, I don't know, just general energy consumers anywhere in the stream? What makes miners unique in terms of their flexibility or maybe lack thereof? Just anything about the process of mining and consuming power. Zach, maybe hand it back to you for.
Yeah, I think what makes us unique is the fact that, we can consume a very flat load all the time, and then we can drop it off almost immediately, and then bring it right back on. And I think that that's important because what a lot of people don't realize is how fragile our grid is. We have all this infrastructure, and a lot of this infrastructure is not only, old, but, it's seeing a dramatic change of what's happening. You look at electric vehicles are now being added. You look to all these different things as we work to decarbonize our grid that are all great, but they're also very hard on the grid. So, we can interact in a way that actually improves grid health. And that was one of our focuses when we were a microgrid company, was in improving grid health through energy storage. And now just seeing, how us as Bitcoin miners, we're just big batteries. But also it allows a method for new infrastructure, whether it's renewables, whether it's power plants, to actually be paid for and funded. And I think that's what's incredibly important too. The age of our grid is a problem, and somebody's got to pay for it. And I think Bitcoin miners are very well positioned because of the profits we make and the incentives that we have to keep power up all the time to run, to be well positioned to actually improve the grid across this whole nation.
Yeah, Harry. Yeah, no, definitely clap for that. Harry, you talk about this a lot, like how Bitcoin miners can, very practically improve grid infrastructure. I mean, it's on your shirt too. Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what does it actually look like? How do miners, materially improve our electricity infrastructure?
So, what Bitcoin miners have done is, what we haven't done is we have not provided a revolution in computing. We haven't reinvented how computers work. We have reinvented how power gets bought. And so if you look at a traditional large-scale manufacturing load or industrial load, and you look at the business that sits behind that, so we'll use a Toyota manufacturing plant or whatever, and you look at their income statement at the end of the month, their power bill is maybe 20, 25, 30% of their income statement on the cost side. For a Bitcoin miner, we want that number to be well into the 90s. So we want to spend more money on power each month than anything else, because each unit of revenue is directly correlated to a unit of power. And so what that means is that we have a unique level of sensitivity to the power price relative to any other piece of the ecosystem of the business that we are in charge of running. And so if we're able to provide a benefit to the energy system, and that benefit is able to be priced in our business model, we are much more incentivized to provide good behavior into the energy consumption profile than any of these other large-scale power consumers. And so we have a unique flexibility, which means that there can be contractual and business model innovation, not just the technical innovation in how do you run a Bitcoin mine. And that's the point, is you're able to introduce a new, really special customer who's able to provide net new benefit to a system that historically hasn't been able to realize these opportunities.
Yeah. Now, Paul, I want to add a little bit onto that, because a key piece of this is what type of power, I guess what source of energy this power is being generated by. And you guys fit into this whole conversation, which has sort of risen to the fore of the whole mining industry pretty strongly. I guess the best way to phrase this question is, do you think like long-term mining will favor one or a few particular types of energy over others? Or how do you guys think about, and I don't want your guys' other opinions on it too, but how do you think about the spectrum of energy that could be produced to power Bitcoin mines? Sure. And long-term, like, will mining favor one or a few of them over others?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin mining requires three big resources. The first one is quality talent. And I think we're getting more and more fantastic people coming into the space. That's number one. Number two, capital. Capital is required. I think we're starting to see more institutions come into the space. We'll start to see a little bit less predatory, lending practices, more realistic commercial terms consistent with the kind of institutional industry we represent. But three, I think the most important is energy. And I think energy will be a game changer in the sense that, one, there'll be a price risk. There is a operational cost difference between a fellow who's got zero carbon versus a guy that's got a fossil fuel resource and he's buying carbon credits, or maybe he's suffering the volatile price of gas today. The second issue is it's just a risk issue. As you look at the regulatory environment, and I think we should all welcome regulation because it's coming, and we should embrace it and help be part of of the team that writes it. But I think some of the low-hanging fruit of regulation is going to look at the fuel resource, and so it's another risk element to a miner. And so I think the business will evolve to the greatest level of capital efficiency and energy efficiency. And from our perspective, that was zero carbon.
Gotcha. That'll make sense. Sergey, did you want to add something there?
I think when we're talking about the grid, it's very important to understand that it's not properly balanced. And Bitcoin mining nowadays is mobile. So we can take a mobile data center, like, for example, built by Easy Blockchain, and drop it anywhere where you can see that there is not enough load, especially in West Texas, where there's a lot of folks are putting stuff, or you can put it anywhere else. So the important part is that now you don't bring energy to the Bitcoin mining. It's vice versa. You bring Bitcoin mining to the source of energy. And thus, you go to locations where you would never believe have so much power. Like, for example, in Midwest, there are a lot of projects that have been abandoned, specifically in manufacturing. And there's all this electrical infrastructure sitting there, and no one goes there. Those towns are empty. So what, for example, we do, we take our mobile data centers, we fill them with crypto mining equipment, we just drop them in the areas regardless of economy level, regardless if there are people or not. We'll just drop it there. We're going to start generating crypto. We're going to start generating revenue for the city, for the county. We're going to generate that revenue for state, and people will come. Because before the town or the small area didn't have anyone. So now it's a resurrection of energy in general. So we're resurrecting energy in the areas where it was dead. So that's the beauty about Bitcoin mining and it being mobile.
But I also think it's important to emphasize, that's great. I think it's very important to emphasize scale, right? As Bitcoin mining becomes more institutional, you want to be in a place where you could take the advantage of scale. And second of all, long term, right? When you take a look at the energy infrastructure markets, and Bitcoin mining is energy infrastructure, that's what it is. So the fellows that have succeeded in energy infrastructure ultimately had matching resources on both ends. So they were able to find a long-term fuel resource and a long-term electricity offtake. All that we're doing today is taking that local resource of electricity and storing, as you said, in Bitcoin, which is very important. So I think it's important that you can take a long-term view that enables you to scale if you're really going to be a profitable miner.
That makes sense. I want to get back to scale in just a minute, but I want to talk about what you both just mentioned, mining as energy infrastructure. When you're sourcing this energy that's out in the middle of nowhere, has basically a market value of zero, And when you're dealing with the companies that own these resources, do Bitcoin miners and these energy companies always like speak the same language, or are they always on the same page? What is that relationship like, I guess? And if not, like how do you, navigate and negotiate maybe some of the difficulties in those conversations? Harry, maybe you want to start with that and then go down.
I have a few wide-ranging thoughts on this. The first is that the question that we received the most was, is this real? Can you actually do this? and the look of disbelief lasting months. So like this is fundamentally an innovative approach to consuming power relative to what has happened for the last 95 years. So this is a step function increase in the type of relationship that a miner is able to have with a power producer. The second is just we're going to take a little trip down Bitcoin memory lane, which is in 2019, nobody was taking the call. Like this was like you were the crazy person. You want how many megawatts? We've only signed a deal that big like once in the last 30 years. End of 2020, beginning of 2021, they're calling us. Mm-hmm. And so this is here, and this is winning, and the people who are going to build the community of off-takers for the future are at the leading edge, and they are being proactive about having relationships with miners. So that's kind of where we are now today. And so when you talk about kind of the language, I think that the language between the energy company and the Bitcoin miner is adjusting to be kind of the same. I think that the overall rate structure regime and how does the energy get priced and sold, that's where the next level of translation and education is happening now. So I think everybody kind of gets what we're trying to do, but I think that the mechanics of achieving it are still maturing. And so I think that there's still a lot of energy that should be bought by miners today that isn't yet because of mechanical and structural reasons, and those barriers will get broken down over time because there's nothing more exciting than an economic incentive. And so that's where we're headed next. Is some of these rate structures are going to break down, and if I were the CEO of a power company, I would be pitching my board to put in place a Bitcoin mining rate structure to attract us to your region, and we will be able to innovate on that process together and get there.
Absolutely.
No, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would say that's actually the biggest hurdle right now is, the education has happened and things have progressed really well, but the rate structures, nobody knows how to price in that much power for that consistent of a load, because a lot of times when in the price structure, it's based on this variability and spiking. And the other thing that's happening too is, to your point, going into jurisdictions where, the people running that power department, are maybe 30 years behind the curve because these are cities that haven't been getting the right attention, right? There's infrastructure that has kind of been sitting idle and ready to go. And as you get into these, understanding how much technology has changed, that's where we're also seeing education, is teaching them how they can better control their loads, about demand response programs that don't exist in certain states that do exist in others and have become commonplace. So I think there's a lot of education that's coming. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is really the financial conversations. In the last 2 years, now Bitcoin miners are seen as really good anchor tenants to large-scale PPAs, whether that's solar or wind. I think that's a big part of this is the new infrastructure that has the opportunity to be built on the back of Bitcoin miners. And that's been a big education piece for us, because that's what we want to play a big role in. Really educating them on the staying power of Bitcoin, and have some interesting conversations where suddenly difficulty is something that now power producers know something about, and they're trying to predict themselves. So I think we've come a really long way in just 2 years. But yeah, that financial component where we're seen as the creditworthy backer to make new projects happen. The government's not paying for it right now. We've seen how the bills aren't passing, but we know that we need it. And I think that it's going to get more interesting in the future, and Bitcoin mining is going to play an ever more important role in that.
I'm kind of where Harry is. I think the language is not quite there yet. And I think there's more to drop here, because when some of the early PPAs to miners start to expire and roll off, and they see the new increased pricing or the new hey, you got to help me improve the grid, or hey, this is the fuel price now, people are going to, get a little bit anxious. So I don't think the language is the same, and it's why we are sort of vertically integrated, why we like to own our own generation. But I can tell you, the power space is not some dinosaur out there. They had competition from IPPs for 20 years that helped bring them forward. And they have other sophisticated clients, whether it's in machine-based learning or, and so I think they're quick to learn and quick to respond. We have a site in upstate New York, Lake Merida, which was, a legendary coal-fired power plant in upstate New York. It was the last coal-fired power plant in the state of New York. We had families that worked for me there for 3 generations, which is remarkable. And we had to let those guys go when we shut down that plant and mitigated the facility. But we now have those employees back, union employees back, retrained to mine Bitcoin and to repair Bitcoin miners. And I think it's a really huge win for the space. And I think that's happening all over the country. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty, that's pretty counter to the narrative you hear about mining, that story you just told. And I think, I mean, I know it is happening in other facilities all across the U.S. And we'll expand as companies like your own and others continue to scale up. I want to circle back to scale, though, and talk about, I guess, what mining looks like 5 to 10 years from now, and give just a brief moment of time for like critics and critiques that we hear in, from politicians or journalists or what have you, and try to, I guess, achieve kind of like a steel man of things that they think about when they look at mining. Because sure, with everything, especially mining, there's risks and benefits, upsides and downsides. Like with what we expect to be massive expansion of hash rates, specifically in the US, but across all North America, what are some of the risks or potential concerns that you have and think about and strategize ways to mitigate as you continue to expand your operations? Starting with you, Paul, then I want to go on the panel to hear from each of you. What things could go wrong and how do you think about ways to mitigate those?
Right. Obviously, I'm a big believer in zero carbon, so I think that there'll be a continued explosion in that direction. We have nukes in this country, massive spinning reserves. Bitcoin miners are the anchor tenant for those guys, the absolute anchor tenant. So I think we'll see more of that. I think some of the risks we'll see for existing miners that are vulnerable to gas pricing, that is something that we have to be mindful of. And I think folks are truly worried about, how do we get into hedging programs for our fuel resources and all that. I'm not worried about regulation. We think regulation's coming. We think it will ultimately start here, go there, end up in a place that is sensible. And we think that as an industry, we should focus on helping to embrace it. I think, again, part of the early stuff will hang around transparency and what your fuel resource is. For us, it's an intensive capital business. We're trying to change the language to, but do you have the plugs? It's an energy infrastructure business. So if we were successful in financing a great energy infrastructure industry in the United States, we should figure out how to finance a Bitcoin mining industry in the United States. And Bitcoin mining must be here because of the rule of law, because of the transparency. And so we're pretty excited about it. I have clear visibility on 800 megawatts to mine. I got to execute on the business plan. I have to find the best people that can help me do it. That's where my focus is.
Love it. Harry, did you want to jump in there on risks and how you think about them?
I want to talk about risks to the grid, not risks to the mine. Because I think Bitcoin mines are a very straightforward, phenomenally positive business that bring prosperity to everywhere they're set up. The risk to the grid is the Duct Curve. So for those of us who are not energy wonks in the crowd, maybe some of you, the Duct Curve is how the map of renewable generation overlays on top of the map of intraday demand for power. So maybe you run an air conditioner in your hot state, or maybe the washing machine and whatever. Like, we know that within the course of a day, 10,000 households are going to use energy on some reasonably similar basis. The problem is that the generation assets, when they're intermittent, do not generate the power on the same shape. And so you have higher peaks and lower troughs, and that means that there's a bigger gap. And so what that does is it drives down the overall revenue provided to baseload providers. So there's a nuclear plant. We're huge nuclear fans. I totally agree. I want to talk to you about it after. But what a nuclear plant does is it provides 99% capacity factor 93% of the time. And that's incredibly important because it means that the light switch is always going to work. But it's hard because how do you offtake something with such high uptime? So you've got these two ideas. One is that you have peaker generation, and the other is that you have curtailed consumption. And that's how you map the demand side to the supply side in a grid context. The risk is that we lose our incredible base load because the dislocation around price has pulled the revenue away from the baseload provider into the intermittent provider. And so if we do not have a healthy relationship between our baseload generation and our intermittent generation, we're going to lose access to reliability. Who maybe is from California and has experienced lack of access to power or prices in the $400 per megawatt hour, 40-cent kilowatt hour type of range? The reason that happens is because there's a power company in California that signed a contract with a household. They are obligated to deliver the power to that household. If the power is not getting generated in the locality there, they've got to go import that power from somewhere else. And so they've represented that they are now a forced buyer in order to make good on their contract to the household. Forced buyers typically don't underpay. And so what we've done is we've created an environment where there are a lot of forced buyers in order to make good on contracts. And so the instability in the mapping of base load and intermittent load into the household consumption has created challenges in the grid. The good news is we've got Bitcoin miners who can really help change the story and the narrative here so that we're able to deliver more power at lower cost to more people, which is highly correlated to human flourishing over time.
That's awesome. I'm not sure if everyone here expected to come in and get a Energy Markets 301 course, but we just got it. So, Zach or Sergey, anything to add?
No, I'll hit on that, and I appreciate that because actually that's where we've been doing business is largely been in California on the energy side, and the grid health over there is just a disaster. Yeah. And it's become the perfect example of what not to do from a long-term setting. Yeah. So I agree with what everybody said so far. So rather than reiterate that, I want to focus on a different risk and something I think that, thinking long term, I think what's important to us is to be an active participant in the communication of what's being said, out in the market. To make sure, we already know we need to be, good corporate citizens and citizens of the world and behave and all these things. But, making sure we're taking a very active role in communicating these benefits that we're talking about today. I think a lot of people, the narrative is, oh, consume power, but people don't realize the grid health benefits and things like that. So it's about owning the narrative in a positive way. We're seeing people throw, money at counterintuitive narratives, that are largely misleading. And, we, I think as a community, just need to do a better job, or, we can do a better job of further bonding together and making sure that message is really clear. Making sure, all the secondary social benefits of Bitcoin are also well known. And I think the more we can get that positive message out, for the unbanked and everything that, a lot of people are here today to talk about in some of the other panels, but we just have to do a better job of getting the message out because there's so many positive things both on, at all levels, whether it's power, whether it's social, whatever it may be that Bitcoin is doing. And I think as long as we take a very proactive role as an industry, I agree. I think the future is very, very bright with what we have ahead of us.
I think there are two major risks in Bitcoin mining, and I'm going to be talking more not a grid part, but actually the Bitcoin side. Specifically, the price of Bitcoin, it is not controlled by us. We're just farmers at the end of the day. It's like the same guys who are farming corn, right? They are just expecting the CME to open with good prices, and there's demand, supply, and that's all. So they do not control that. However, what they control is, how they work with the ground, with the land, and how much water they can put in that ground. the same on our end. We work hard, we invest a lot of money into cryptocurrency mining facilities all over the place. And then there is some trader on FTX or somewhere else just opens a huge short position and the price goes down, or even other stuff, like some political risks. Someone says that we would like to, seize some governments will say they seize a bunch of cryptocurrency, a bunch of Bitcoin because of someone, did some bad thing. And that influences the markets, unfortunately. And the people who are actually struggling on that are us, because we do not control that. We produce one Bitcoin, let's say the price $30,000, and we sold it at 45. That's it. That's all we would do. And that's a problem. That's how people look. That's how all we do. Because we do more than that. We actually control. We do a lot of work for local communities, as Doc mentioned. We work a lot with the economic development departments. We create jobs at the end of the day. Why no one is talking about how the Bitcoin mining actually create jobs? That was a very, very wrong argument that Bitcoin mining doesn't create jobs. You just started from your conversation that talent is one of the most important things in Bitcoin mining, because those people are retrained, they are technicians, they are actually paid rather well. And it's not only like one person can run a facility of 10 megawatts, you need actually up to 10 people though. So I think this is something very important that we need to talk about. And the political risk is, specifically on local level, is that in New York they keep talking about those poor fish in those lakes, and in Wyoming, Cynthia Loomis is praising everyone. So I would go to Wyoming. That's it, and that's what I think is good about Bitcoin, that we can go anywhere, right? So we can go anywhere. You don't like us here, we'll go to other state. And that's the beauty about this distributed network of microgrids that we're here to talk about, that we can build anywhere, and we build infrastructure around it. In order to build a cryptocurrency mining farm, you have to build a road, you have to build an office, you have to build a substation, a transformer, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's something that we need to pay more attention. But I believe those specific risks about the price and political risks, they're going to be mitigated at the end of the day, as if we have more events like this, where we can talk more about this, and actual experts go and talk about the real problems, not just the folks who have more political influence.
Yeah, I wish we had more time to talk about the political risk, because you definitely see the interstate competition to attract Bitcoin miners, or in some cases kick them out, definitely heating up. Very interesting dynamics there. We're under 5 minutes. I kind of want to wrap up the panel by giving each of you a chance to explain where you see Bitcoin mining, I guess what Bitcoin mining will look like in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's the types of companies that will sort of merge with Bitcoin mining or become Bitcoin miners, what the industry will look like from a political or regulatory perspective within the US or outside the US. Pretty much anything's fair game. I just want to know each of your visions for where the industry is headed, and from a 10,000-foot view, what it will look like. Harry, maybe start with you.
I think that the governing principle that I work from first is just that Bitcoin mining is fundamentally optimistic. We are fundamentally optimistic that we can deliver more revenue to places that didn't receive revenue for selling power, or revenue for bringing a new large business to that region. And the great part about bringing new revenue somewhere is that that revenue gets recycled many, many, many times within that community and provides benefit at many, many levels. So I think that the 5 to 10 year vision, we could talk about the business and that side of things, but just I think we're going to wake up in 10 years and the towns and counties and cities and communities that have Bitcoin mines are going to be thought of in this incredible, positive, optimistic way, and that the towns that don't have them yet are going to be recruiting Bitcoin miners to be building there.
That's awesome.
No, I agree with that. And I think something else that we're going to see is we're just going to see greater community partnerships, because, to your point, the interactions that the miner has in the community, like in the 2 mines we've set up, we are grid connected there. but we have paid directly to upgrade the infrastructure. So that benefits not only us, but the communities around us. So I think you're going to see communities that embrace Bitcoin mining thriving. From a state of the industry in 5 years, I think that there's going to be, very large mines, but I think we're also going to see quite a few small mines where, once grid balancing gets fully embraced and adopted, we're going to see that far and wide. So there's going to be a couple meg here and a couple meg there, and then there's also going to be a 200 megawatt facility, down the street. And so I think that as we as miners also get better at managing these mines in a different way, I think you're going to see really, instead of hearing about, a Bitcoin mine down the corner, there's somebody that is a partner with a grid operator that is balancing it throughout a whole area. So I think it's going to be a really good interaction with the energy business and energy industry as a whole. But I do think that they are going to look to us as, the mining companies that develop now to be those partners. I don't necessarily see that they're going to try and jump in on their own. Over time, will they, consolidate? Will they acquire? Will they do all of that? Yes, absolutely. But at least at 5 years from now, I still think that, all the miners that are building up now are just going to be really good partners. And, it'll be interesting, though. It'll be interesting to see how it really works out.
I believe there are a couple areas where Bitcoin mining is going to thrive. Well, of course, energy. In my opinion, in the next couple of years, every power plant is going to have a Bitcoin mining on its backyard. So they can balance the energy that they produce. That's number one. Number two, natural gas sector. Every oil and gas company has a tremendous opportunity to utilize Bitcoin mining as a tool to mitigate their risk of natural gas prices going up or down. They can install a cryptocurrency mining facility, put a generator to work. And if natural gas prices go to $6 and you make only 5 by mining Bitcoin, you will just sell the gas. If the Bitcoin makes less revenue than selling the gas, you would just do the opposite. So they can mitigate. And now when in the midstream industry, you have different markets where you can sell your carbon, sell your gas, right? So these are the two sectors. All of them are energy. Of course, incentivizing renewables is a big deal. Today we had, I believe, an announcement about Block and Tesla doing a project in Texas. So same thing, you can install, I think there are going to be more and more facilities coming like that online.
Yeah.
Because you can install solar panels, you can install wind panels, and you can install battery and cryptocurrency mining facility, and it will just break even way sooner than it would before.
Yeah. Well.
So last night, New York State Legislature passed a law that basically said that Bitcoin mining is going to be covered and assessed by the Department of Revenue and Taxation in New York State. And that's fantastic, because it means that the future that we're all talking about is here, because it put Bitcoin on the same level as the insurance industry and the fintech industry, okay? And what it also means is that when you're contemplating taxation and revenue on a commodity, it means you're not thinking about mandating that it can't exist. So for me, the future of Bitcoin is there'll be consolidation in the space amongst the miners. There'll be consolidation in the space amongst miners and generators. I think you'll see a greater level of vertical integration. We should go back to where you started. You'll see massive improvements in the grid, because transmission is today a regulated thing. And so nobody wants to invest in it because they're going to get a regulated return. Miners will invest in it because they want quality electricity so they can mine all the time. So we're going to see greater infrastructure, which will serve not only all of us and all of you, but our moms, our kids, their friends, anybody that is connected to the grid. Grandma too.
I love it. Thank you. Please give a huge round of applause for these guys. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and visions. We're out of time.